Hi, I'm Farah Danish. Welcome to my Calm Autism Mom podcast. I'm a certified brain gym movement facilitator, former special educator, and a mindset coach. Through my podcast, I bring together parents, experts from educational, psychology, and medical communities to share innovative insights on parenting and supporting individuals on the spectrum. My mission is simple: to continuously learn and share the latest autism-related news and strategies, bringing you powerful conversations and practical solutions you can use right now. So, if you're an autism mom searching for answers, support, or just some real inspiration, you're in exactly the right place, my friend. Let's transform your autism parenting journey starting right now. Today, I have with me Jonathon Plaze, who's a board-certified behavior analyst with over 16 years of experience in behavior analysis. As the founder of Higher Echelon Behavior, Jonathon provides ABA therapy, behavioral sports psychology, and clinical behavior analysis. He's also the founder of My Behavior Network, an innovative online platform offering ongoing training and professional development for families and clinicians in the space of neurodevelopmental conditions. Their approach is grounded in assent-based therapy and integrative support, with a focus on empowering individuals through skill-based programming. So join me in welcoming Jonathon Plaze. So John, can you talk me through about elopement? What is elopement and what triggers it?
Well, elopement could look different for every child. Not necessarily there's not one way to look at it, and there's not one specific trigger. Elopement can be triggered by many different factors. And elopement essentially is the individual or the learner wandering or walking away away from adult supervision, or just wandering without awareness of any safety risks, right? That could be associated with his wandering or with running. With some individuals, elopement is manifested as like running, like a full out sprint.
Yeah.
And in terms of triggers, it's for some individuals, it's a very sensory driven type of behavior where they're seeking like a sensory experience, right? It could be that perhaps they want to come closer to a sight, something that they saw, a sound, or just like a general sensation in the environment, and they want to, they're intrigued by it, so they run towards it without permission, without supervision, and without awareness of their surroundings and the safety concerns that could come from running across the street to engage with whatever the sensory stimulation was, right? So that is what typically elopement looks like. It could be a run, it could be wandering off. Essentially is a lack of awareness as well, right? Where they're almost wandering, sometimes in some cases aimlessly, right? And obviously that could raise some safety concerns, especially if you are out and about in the street, right?
Because
Definitely concerning.
Yeah, it is, because my third son, he has ADHD and some of the characteristics of autism. He hasn't been formally diagnosed with autism, but he has given me several heart attacks. But and at that time, there was no diagnosis. We didn't know that he had ADHD. We didn't pick up on the signs. And this is around the time when he was 3 or 4 years old. Every time we'd be out, we wouldn't be able to find him. Like 20 minutes into it, we had to make sure that our eyes were on him. And for a minute, you look away and he's gone.
You're gone.
Yeah. So, and that
Scary stuff.
really scary. And this happened when we were traveling to a new country. So it's even scarier because it's a new country.
Yeah.
We don't know anybody here, and he's done it to me over there. Oh my God. But I know for him, it comes from a place of lack of awareness. He wouldn't know. He would just, drift off or just stay back where we were. And we moved on, and he's still in the same place. Yeah. So, and you're right. There are a lot of things that can trigger it. It's sensory driven, or it can be lack of awareness. But there are adults who are on the spectrum who elope as well, right? Or there can be older kids. And it can be either a sensory seeking behavior, or it can be self-stimulatory. It can be, or they just need to get out because they're, just dysregulated. How can they be, in your opinion, do you think can they be taught to elope safely, or is that something that can be done, or, I mean, how would you work around something like that with an much older child or individual?
So just to go back a little bit on the previous point that was made in terms of like why elopement happens, and the multi-function components surrounding elopement, right? Like we mentioned, it could be self-stimulatory, right? It could be just something that for them is a sensory experience that they enjoy. It could be also be, uh, like you mentioned, just an overall lack of awareness and just drifting off almost, aimlessly. It could be attention, right? As a form of communication. It could be like something they enjoy doing. It could be multifunction in the sense that it's a sensory experience, but they also enjoy the attention that is generated from him running off and the adult perhaps chasing the individual, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which I've had cases where the child turns elopement into a game,
Okay.
right? So the initial elopement is, for example, very sensory driven, where the child is drawn to a sound, a sight, and then as we see that the behavior starts to become like a danger, we go and redirect, and the child, now turns, gives you like that expectant look, and it's like, oh, we're playing chase now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and we're running, right? So it could be for attention as well. And the reason I say attention is because typically with those situations, we can, as a proactive way to go about it would be to teach a functional way for the child to communicate, I want to play. I want to
Mm.
play chase, or I want to, engage in this type of running behavior. And I think that sets the tone for what, the question you asked is how can we have the child engage in that safely? And it's
Mm.
by creating breaks where they can engage in those activities that they enjoy, like running, right?
Yeah.
So if we structure that during our sessions, like, hey, first we're going to engage in these type of activities, and then we'll be able to run, or then you'll be able
Mm.
to have a break where you can wander. Then ultimately, what that does is create more control. We start to establish more control on that behavior, where now the break is what's going to signal their ability to run rather than just their ability to run at all times, if that makes sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So it's just kind of putting it under control, under the control of a structured break, right? And I think that's what a lot of times, like for example, when I'm handling elopement, I like to incorporate that a lot, along with a couple other things when it comes to elopement. But that's definitely one of them. Being able to provide them with an opportunity to engage in that behavior in an appropriate setting when the time is right.
Yeah. And so, what can parents do who have kids like that, who are always in danger of eloping? What can parents do right now to make their lives a little easier?
Or I think, and to answer that question, I feel it's important for us to touch on how elopement is typically handled or managed. And I want to say managed because it's not really targeted. I feel like it's managed in traditional ABA therapy,
Mhm.
where their approach is grounded on, I wouldn't say like, I hate to use this term so often, but it's just outdated strategies ultimately. It's like an outdated way to approach elopement and behavior. And is they typically try to identify a function behind the elopement. Why is it
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
And then once you identify that one function, then you start to create like antecedent strategies or antecedent manipulations to prevent the behavior from happening. Right. So in typical ABA therapy, family comes with their child engages in elopement. The behavior analyst does, the assessment, identifies the function, and hey, you know what? Let's start incorporating preventative measures, right?
Mhm.
Proactive strategies are like preventative measures in
Yeah.
this case. So it would be like, let's avoid, open doors. Let's avoid him being outside, when there's no adult supervision. Let's avoid, certain triggers like, exit doors. Like let's cover those. So,
Mhm.
he's not drawn to those things. And what that does is manage the behavior, right? It
For
doesn't
that time.
improve it. I feel like it manages it because it's now being managed under like a controlled setting. Right? You're trying to
Mm.
manipulate a bunch of factors in the environment to prevent the behavior from happening. And that's what you see in traditional ABA, a lot of preventative measures. And for me, with my approach, and I guess my method, you can say, which is not a method yet, but it will be a method once I have some science behind it and some studies behind it. I want to turn it into my method. But but uh but for me, I feel like it's more about exposure. So it's more about exposure to those same triggers that elicit that behavior, right? Because
Oh,
when you prevent and prevent and prevent, you are not preparing the individual
yeah,
for times where you're not going to have that structured environment. And that could be
exactly.
in a social outing. What are you gonna do when you go out to the grocery shopping, or you go to to the mall and you have all of these triggers? The
Mm,
child is not equipped to handle those.
yeah.
So he's been almost dying to engage in this behavior now. You're now in the perfect setting for it. You're likely to see that behavior in a high magnitude, right? So for me, it's more about, can we use a structured environment, but to expose them progressively to
Mm,
those triggers, right? If the child is triggered by an open door, we don't need to avoid the open door. We need to progressively expose them to that door being opened and teach them on a
tolerate
different
it?
learning
Is that
tolerance,
the right word? Yeah.
tolerance,
Okay.
tolerance,
Tolerate the open
absolutely.
door. Okay. Okay.
Tolerance, and that's what it's. We're training tolerance, basically, right? But in that process of training, that it has to be through an approach that is, they're willing participants, is voluntary,
Mm,
it's very child led, is very compassionate, right? Not that compliance based type of therapy that you've seen, where where we're forcing kids to do things, right? But
yeah.
I feel like the goal is to expose the child more to
Mm,
those triggers that elicit the running. If we could expose them to it in a way that is more controlled while we're also accounting for safety, then we can start teaching him, like, hey, when you see an open door, like, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to run through it, right? Instead, you can ask me, let's walk through it. Can I close the door? Can I open the door more and walk out? Right now, we're working on functional communication.
mm,
And I do that during my sessions. So I don't try to avoid as much. Initially, we do, because we have to prevent the behavior from happening, especially if it's,
exactly.
happening at a high level. It is a big concern. So of course, you have your safety measures in place. Like, I've had one family who used to use a harness,
Yeah.
almost like a strap that
Yeah.
would go, from their wrist to the child's wrist, and it was absolutely necessary. So I couldn't argue
Yeah. No
against it, because
judgment there. I completely
yeah,
respect that. Yeah.
I, I I completely respect it, and you have to do what you could to keep your son safe. Is a child that had already gone through, like, situations where he got lost, the police had to be involved, so the behavior was severe. So the first priority is, we have to account for safety. So I
Yeah.
get that. But when
Mm,
we started therapy with that child, um my goal was, we're going to incorporate that, we're going to use it because the family's already using it, but the goal for me is going to be to fade it,
fade
to
it.
fade it and we're going to fade it by not preventing, all of the triggers that, make him want to run. Instead, while we're using the preventative measures, we're going to be exposing him to those triggers and teaching him tolerance and teaching
Mm.
him communication so that he can engage with it in a better, more efficient way. Right?
Okay. Let me
That's a
throw.
lot of information. It's a lot of information
That's a
there.
lot of information, but no, that's really good because you know what? I've created the scenario in my head now, and I'm going to throw another one at you. Be ready for this one.
Sure, sure, sure.
What if the child has a meltdown when you try to teach him this tolerance? Like, how do you manage? Now you've got like a meltdown and a child who wants to run out that door. How do you handle both of the behaviors now?
so so before I even get to the point where I'm exposing him to triggers, right? I have to have his buy-in on my end. Like, I have to make sure that he's a willing participant and a voluntary participant. So I have to go through my steps before I even get to that point, right? So before we're even working on, because that's a skill-based part of our session. But before we getting to the point, we're working on skill, which skill for the learner is typically outside of their comfort zone. It's something that requires effort.
Yeah.
It could be insignificant for them. So before I even get there, I have to make sure that he loves engaging with me, right? That he loves to engage with me, that he
And
loves
listen to
to
you. Yeah. That he wants.
listen to me, right?
Yeah.
And I've been able to do all of these things because perhaps early on, what I've been doing prior to presenting that type of work, I've established trust and I've established rapport. And rather than, when him having to feel like he needs a tantrum to tell me or to communicate to me, I don't want to do this. We've already established that you don't have to get to that point.
Mm.
Before you get to that point, I pick up on your early signs of distress. I don't let you get to the point of a full tantrum. And you know that already because in previous trials, before when you already start to look already uncomfortable, I don't even continue pushing anymore. I just tell you, oh, it looks like you're uncomfortable. You know what? I can teach you a way for you to ask me for a break, or I can teach you a way to tell me we don't have to continue doing this. Like you have the lead right now. And we've done that so much
So much.
that
Yeah.
he's learned, you know what, I have control in this session. So
Yeah.
I'm willing to go the extra mile with you because I trust that if I get uncomfortable at any point, I won't have to completely throw a
Yeah, you've got
tantrum.
his back, basically.
I got your back. You're not ready for this. We don't have to do it right now. Right. So we've established that early on. Right. So we'll avoid that. Will there be a tantrum? Possibly. It could. Right. It may just escalate out of nowhere. But then for me, at that point, it turns into a situation where I want to turn it into communication opportunities. I want to turn it into, take a step back. And at that point, my priority is no longer, exposing him to the door being
Yeah.
open. You know, at that point, my priority is our communication and our rapport, and then making sure I don't break our trust. So continuing to reinforce communication. Hey, buddy, remember we don't have to tantrum in this way. I need a break, please. He models it. Great job. I love how you requested that. Let's take 2 or 3 minutes and we'll come back to this later. Right.
Mm.
So then he learns, you know what? Like he still listens to me. Right. And I'm still under control here no matter what we do. Right. So I think that's what I have to establish early on.
Oh, wow. That is a lot of information. No, but I like what you said over there that it's not something you can just suddenly introduce. It is something that you have to work towards. It's building
Sure.
rapport and all. And it's not just with a therapist. It's this is something because I'm a parents coach, and this is something I talk to parents about a lot, that you have to first develop that relationship. The child needs to understand that or should know that my parents have my back and that I'm not going to
Yes.
be expected to mask my way through this because that is
Right.
exhausting. So it all
Sure.
makes sense. I
And that point that you made there of having to build rapport and trust, that's something that doesn't take place just in the beginning of the therapeutic relationship. That's something that has to take place every session or every day. Right. So it's in an ABA, in traditional ABA, we call it pairing, right?
yeah.
Um, we call it pairing where it's like, oh, you started with a new client, make sure that you spent, a week doing fun things so that you associate the association with like fun, right?
Mm.
And for me, it's more like we have to do that every day. It's not a 1 week
It's not
thing.
a one
It's not
week
a
thing.
2 week. It's not a 2 week thing. It's an everyday thing that we have to be able to have a pulse on what is the child's engagement and willing participation like today. There's many factors that can affect their participation from a day-to-day basis. He may not just not feel well one day. He
Yeah.
may not have slept well. He may a bunch of factors that come into
Yeah.
play, and you have to assess ongoingly.
Oh God! And as a parent, I remember the days when I would walk in, John, and it's like 2 months down in the session, and my son's therapist is just playing with him, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm paying so much money because therapy here in Dubai is expensive. I don't know how it is over there, but over here it's really expensive. And you go in, therapist is just playing with your child. I'm like, oh my God, I could be doing this with my child,
I could do that. I could
but
do that.
I'm not. I'm unable
Sure.
to play with my child at home. But
Sure.
I mean, I've come a long way since then, and I understand the importance of that. So I get it now. So okay, just to end this
Sure.
topic off on elopement, what are the top three things you'd suggest? It sounds like the top five, but no, top three tips that you would give parents on how to sensibly work around a child who just doesn't understand the concept of danger, and it can be really difficult to go out with a child like that. So, what do you think they should plan for and prepare for when they are heading out with their child?
I think the preventative measures early on, I think, are important. So like I mentioned, like with that one family that would wear the wrist
Yeah.
attachment.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily suggest it, but
But
I'm a
if you
father
need
of two
to.
I'm a father of two boys, and my son is not on the autism spectrum, not that I know of, but my son is a runner. He is high energy, and I use it myself. I use it with him.
Yeah.
So
Safety first.
I am mindful before I leave my house. If I'm going out, with my 2-year-old, I make sure I have it with me. Otherwise, I'm going to be running after him out in the street, and it could be, a hazardous situation. So for me, I have to do that. So we have families that have children on the spectrum that are engaging in this type of behavior, making sure that you have a preventative measure in place,
Mm.
whether that could be, locked doors or some type of device that can keep a child safe. I have some families that have gone to the extent of when, the behavior is that severe and they've gotten lost before. I've had families that have like a bracelet in place, like a GPS
Yeah.
bracelet in place,
Yeah.
where you can track your child in case, God forbid he were to,
Probably, yeah.
get lost. Right.
Mm.
So these are all preventative measures that I feel are proactive ways to go about elopement early on. I don't think it's a solution, but I think
It's
it's
not a
part of the
solution, but yeah,
it's
until you're
part of
waiting
it.
for help or
Sure. You need
working
it.
on it, you need something
You need it.
to
You need
survive
it. So you
this.
have to have those.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to have those in place to maintain safety, right? To avoid a hazardous situation. Once you have that, I feel like your attention should shift to, or I don't want to say you should, because I try to not suggest so much. I like to prefer, for me, it's important to mention, it's important to seek personalized care and intervention, right? It's not like Mr. ABA coach said this, on Instagram. So let me go try it with my kid. No, go have
It has to be personal.
someone, yeah, have someone and create a very tailored approach to your child's treatment plan. But ideally, in my treatment plan, I'd probably like to start focusing on exposure of going out to those
Mm.
settings that that,
Oh, you
that elicit
mentioned
the
that. Yeah.
behavior. Yeah. So that's another, that's another strategy that, families can implement themselves. You already have a preventative measure in place. Now,
Mm.
you know, the
Push
child's
the
safe,
boundaries a bit. Yeah.
kind of push the boundaries a little bit, create opportunities for communication. It looks like you want to run. It looks like you're drawn, to this window or this light. You can tell me, Mom, let's walk to the light. Let's walk together, right? But not necessarily trying to avoid all of these situations altogether, because then eventually the child is going to he's going to be faced with that stimulus that he's drawn to, and you're not going to
Mm.
be there to block him, and he's
Got
going to
it.
take off on you, right? So just progressively exposing him. And lastly, I would say, focusing on skill, like, and just focusing on skill. And for me, is that communication, being able to provide the child or model to the child, how to communicate in order for him to be able to engage in those type of behaviors in a more, safe and efficient way. Mom, I want to run. Mom, I want to go see, that toy, that car, that window, that sound. Um, Mom, I want to play chase. Having that communication, right?
Yeah.
And mom, the families, they can model it, right? They can model to their child what the child should
Yeah.
be
If it's a
saying to them.
nonverbal child.
Yeah, it's a nonverbal child. And then, teaching communication in that sense, right? Almost like showing your child there's a different way that we can go about this, and you'll still result in the stuff that you like to do, which is run or
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
So making sure, we do that. Those are all things that we could do now. Creating opportunities too, where the child is allowed to do those things. Like, hey,
Mm.
I know you wanted to run earlier. We can run now. Look, you go ahead and play, or go ahead and run, or now we can do chase, and creating moments for that too. And that's no different from what we do in therapy. So that's exactly what I would be doing in therapy too. So
Yeah.
families that have children before they get to therapy, they could be doing these
They
things.
can at least
And
start with
in
this. Yeah.
start with these things. And in therapy, good therapy, I feel, would also focus on this just a lot more rigorously, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's what it's about ultimately, just exposing and teaching skill, equipping, like being able to equip the child with skills so that they can manage that.
Yeah. Great. Well, that was amazing, John. Thank you so much. I think we've covered
No,
quite a
no.
bit, and this is going to be so. I mean, I'm going to switch into 2 episodes as well,
Sure,
because I know moms can't tune in for longer than 15 minutes. Even our adult span is,
for sure.
concentration span is reduced. Off off the. I mean, this got nothing to do with the questions. I wanted to ask you. A mom had approached me with this issue that she has with her child. I wanted to get your opinion on this. Um, her daughter She's about 5 years old, and she has this, like, she can't transition. And when I say transition, not in the usual sense from one period to another period, it, if she's doing something she really likes, it's very difficult to tell her, even if you give her a time schedule that, you know, you've got 5 minutes, you can do a countdown. That doesn't work with her either. She will not leave it and move on. So if they're out
Okay.
somewhere, she's playing with the toy and it's time for them to leave, they can give her a heads up, a countdown. That doesn't work, even with a visual timer. So
Okay.
how do you work with a child with I mean, she had like a major meltdown. So
Okay.
how would you go about working with a child like that?
Yeah, so I'm huge again. So everything for me before I try to provide like suggestions, I like to first assess and see all the factors involved, right? But very generally speaking, um, I like to obviously include visuals. So the timers
Yeah.
and the visuals that you mentioned, the timers for me are crucial because it signals. For me, ideally, I want the timer to signal a transition. It creates
Yeah.
predictability for the child, right?
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, children on the spectrum have a history of having to lose the things they enjoy doing and not knowing when they're going to have access to it again. Just
Mm.
things being removed, right? Like, or whether it's a behavior that they like to do and it's like, hey, you can't do that behavior anymore. Don't
Yeah.
do it again. Or you're engaging with this toy in a certain way. Don't do it in this way anymore. And they don't know when they'll be able to do
Okay.
that again, right?
Okay.
So because of that long history of the most preferred things that they enjoy being removed all the time, their tantrum is almost like their protest behavior. Right? It's
Mm.
almost like you're protesting, like,
Yeah.
and even if you start to want to transition the child may already engage in this tantrum, almost to warn you, like, hey, don't even think about taking my toy away or taking my activity away because I'm going to protest against it. Right. So I feel like it's a big learning history there that you have to change. So it starts with you being flexible at the time of transition. Hey, let's transition. And if you see the resistance, trying to teach the child, like, it's okay for you not to want to transition away from the toy or from the activity that you're doing. It's okay as long as we communicate and you tell me in a functional way without you throwing a tantrum, you can continue doing what you're doing.
Mm.
And it's not something that they're accustomed to. So it requires time. It requires time for them to get used to that new dynamic, right?
Mm.
But we have to start teaching that new dynamic. And then progressively they'll start to understand, if this is taken away, doesn't necessarily mean I
I'm
won't
not
have
gonna get
access
it
to it
again.
again.
Yeah.
Right. But we have to start that process of building trust again and
Mm.
making sure that the individual knows, like, hey, I have a voice and I have a choice here. Typically
Yeah.
they have a history of not being able to voice their opinion and not have a choice on
Yeah.
what they get to do. Right. So I think that's the biggest part. The history there. I think it plays the biggest factor. So starting from scratch and showing the child, empowering the child and letting him know, like, and letting her know, like, hey, it looks like you don't want to transition. Just tell me. Not right now. I need a break. I need more time. Okay, cool. I love how you handled that. I love how you use, your words. Great job. You can continue. And the child's like, what? I could? Okay. I'll keep doing my
Yeah.
thing. But they're like, I'm not accustomed to this. This is different. And we have to do that a lot to
Build that. Yeah.
build that. And then obviously we get to the point where that we start testing their tolerance later on. And we say, oh, I love how you communicated that, but we kind of gotta go. So let's try that for 1 minute and then we'll just come back to it.
Right.
That we start to progressively push them in that to that trigger again of having to transition, right?
Yeah.
So it's a process there. It's a process, but we
Yeah.
definitely got to change the history.
Yeah, because that's what I told her. I told her visual timers, that's your best bet, and you have to build that window. You know, you give the thing back after a minute. You increase the window. We got
Yes,
2 minutes,
yes, yes,
3 minutes, and
for
4 minutes.
sure,
Yeah, and but then you're
for
right.
sure.
You have to look back at the history. How was it in the past? There must be a reason why the child can't trust the mom and
Yes,
why they're doing
yes,
that.
yes, 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 yes. And you can spend a couple trials just not transitioning, like doing like pretend transition, like you're not gonna transition, but you want to present the demand to transition or the instruction to transition and allow the individual to not have to do it, almost to reinforce their behavior of communicating that they don't want to. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, that might have been a little bit confusing. But let's say for like early on, like we can say today we're going to attempt to transition, but with no expectations of having to transition. Like we'll just place a demand. Hey, let's move. Let's transition. Let's do this. And if there's resistance, then we're creating a communication opportunity and we're allowing the kid to do his thing and continue. And it would require for us to do several of those. So what I'm saying basically is do several of those, and then later on we can work on trying to actually transition the child.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you that, wouldn't that be confusing then for the child? Because, then the child would be like, she's done this in the past. I mean, because we were just talking about history, right? Like she's done this in the past where I've said no and she's, let me do whatever I want to do. So how, isn't this a whole process of unlearning something here?
Yeah, so it's a process. It's a the what we're trying to unlearn here is the fact that every time a demand is placed, like to transition, is typically followed by forcefully removing the individual, right? So focus on compliance, right?
Mm.
Holding the child, taking away the toy, physically having to move because they have to move. So that's the history there. What we're doing now is we're trying to almost unlearn that history by not engaging on compliance based type of interventions. We're just focusing on choice,
On choice.
right? On choice for now, right? For choice, and then once there's
Oh,
let's say we
developing
do that.
trust. That's what you're saying. Sorry, I get.
Yeah,
Okay, that's what you're.
developing the trust,
Right. Okay.
developing the trust, and going away from that compliance based type of approach where we're like, okay, we have to go, and then physically making them go. So we're building trust first. If there's trust, then they're more likely later to engage in something that for them is not as preferred, like transitioning.
But this was great, John. Thank you so much. I had so much
No,
fun.
of course, of course, of course. No, it was a great pleasure, and thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Appreciate that. Thank you.
And I'll leave you to have a good day.
Same, likewise. You have a good
Okay.
one.
All right.
Take care. Bye, everyone.